Hi, I'm Ken Freeman, Dean of the School of Management at Boston University. We're privileged today to have the opportunity to engage in conversation with Ed Weiss, General Counsel of the Fenway Sports Group. We're going to talk about leadership, we're going to talk about the sports entertainment industry, we're going to talk about the Boston Red Sox, and much more. Ed, welcome today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here with you.
As we get started, Ed, could you please just share a thumbnail sketch of your background?
Absolutely. I'm a Norwood native, so a native of Boston. I went to Harvard University for college.
Never heard of it. Harvard, is that new?
Majored in history and economics, which is kind of an interdisciplinary thing that you have to make up rather than have it be prescribed. I went to law school at the University of Pennsylvania. Started my legal career by clerking for a federal judge for a year in Philadelphia, and one of the most valuable years, I think, of my life. And worked for a big law firm in New York, Cravath, Swaine and Moore, for a couple of years in New York before I went in-house. I started my in-house legal career at Time Warner Cable and moved from Time Warner Cable to Time Warner as an in-house lawyer at Time Warner until about 2.5 years ago when I took the job as general counsel of Fenway Sports Group.
Was engaging in the world of sports something you've always dreamed of, Ed, or how did it happen?
Well, how did it happen? That was, I'd like to say there was a clear sort of path from here to here, but it really didn't work that way. I think my experience in media was an important qualification when they had been looking for a general counsel. I think sports companies, sports teams, sports franchises have become in many ways mini media companies. Similar principles about aggregating eyeballs, are both in media and in sports. So I think that was probably the qualification that I had that most suited me to this, and it was a bunch of sort of lucky happenstances that came together for me to sort of step in and get the job and, come back to Boston. I mean, Boston has a very strong gravitational pull, so it's a little bit like the prodigal son comes back home.
Absolutely. Now, was it a requirement to be a Red Sox fan to be able to join the group?
I think it probably helped. Probably helped a lot. I think it really was Mr. Henry, Mr. Warner, and Mr. Lucchino, who are the three principals who hired me and who had dealt with the experience when they had originally bought the Red Sox and NESN, what's now a decade ago, as outsiders to Boston. So they always famously tell the story of the headline in the Globe, outsiders won, local zero, because there were many people who favored some of the local bidders at that time. So I suppose in some way having someone who grew up as a passionate Red Sox fan, as I did, or a passionate Bruins fan, which is the other team that NESN primarily covers, there's a continuity of knowledge that I already had that it's very hard to fill in.
Sure.
So I think that was probably helpful.
When at Time Warner, you were involved with, if I recall correctly, antitrust issues, among other aspects. Have you found what the experience directly transferable between Time Warner and what you're doing today?
Well, it's a great question, and one would hope that the answer would be yes. And I'm sure in some way the skills are translatable, but I like to say at Time Warner I was in charge of litigation, antitrust, and intellectual property. And I came to the Red Sox and we had no litigation. Baseball has a federal antitrust exemption, and Major League Baseball manages all of our intellectual property for us. So all the things I really knew were already spoken for, but I think I do a lot of different things now. It's even in some ways I'm as much involved on the business side as I am on the legal side, because we're a much smaller company than a company at Time Warner. Time Warner, we had a really large legal department, and we had hundreds and hundreds of lawyers in-house. At the Red Sox, or at Fenway Sports Group, we have about 6 or 7. So it's a very different.
Very intimate, then. Very intimate. And your offices are, where do you have your offices?
My offices are right. I just walked over here from Fenway Park today. Yes, that was a lovely walk on a nice day. So I'm right at the park, and just a Batcave door away from sneaking into a very busy game and people are wondering where I came from. So
Oh,
it's,
wow.
it's
So
quite
do you have a view of the field from your office?
It's just have to go through the door and right outside my office, and we're right there.
Sort
so.
of like the old Seinfeld episodes where George Costanza, when he was working for the Yankees, had
Yes,
a chance to look
yes.
right out on the field.
Yeah,
How
it is.
exciting this is. Now, at Fenway Sports Group, you're so much more than the Red Sox. Could you, and certainly the Red Sox are perhaps the crown jewel around which the rest of the enterprise has been created. How did this come to pass? What are the elements of the Fenway Sports Group? And what's the rationale for what you've created and your colleagues have
Well,
created?
that's there's a lot in that question. I'll try to unpack it briefly. I think I can talk about the mix of things that we have. If you look at it chronologically, when this ownership group came in, they bought basically the Red Sox and the general partnership interest in Nesson. So the Bruins are our partner in Nesson, but the Red Sox own the majority interest in Nesson. That was part of what was purchased in 2002, and actually we just celebrated 10 years, so the first decade of Fenway Sports Group's stewardship of the Red Sox, because I do think that's an important point to make. We don't view ourselves as owners as much as caretakers of something that is really bigger than us and bigger than our group, because it will persist long after us, and for fans that are not even born yet. So we need to sort of leave it in a better shape than where we found it, I think, is the way we kind of look at it. But over time, I think there was an interest in diversifying what I'd call a portfolio for various reasons, some of them financial, some of them that some of the management expertise that we had more room to run, if you will, or at least we thought it did. And so began, I think, in 2004, we formed the first company called Fenway Sports Management, what's now Fenway Sports Management, which is a marketing representative consulting and sponsorship company, which got into what I would call the third-party business, representing Boston College, for example, your rival, in various sports properties, a variety of things where they would sell the sponsorship for those companies. And I think that experience was sufficiently positive that people thought we should explore, and this is before my time, but further opportunities to diversify the company, which led to the investment in Roush Racing, now known as Roush Fenway Racing, RFR is what we call it, in 2007, 2008, which was one of the leading race teams in the sport at the time, and which we've now been involved with for about 5 or 6 years, and which has had a lot of on-track success since the time we purchased it. The sport itself has seen some real highs. It's kind of troughed a little bit and is now maybe on the way back up. And then most recently, the Liverpool Football Club, which is a transaction we did, it closed in October of 2010. I think that's, and we can talk about that more because there's a lot involved with the Liverpool Football Club, but it's a worldwide fan base, an iconic soccer or football team. We use the two fairly interchangeably now, depending on whether we're on this side of the pond or the other.
Yes.
The last significant transaction that we did, not one that was greeted with a lot of fanfare here in Boston, was our deal with LeBron James to represent his sponsorship opportunities. So about a year ago, it's essentially an intellectual property transaction where for future marketing opportunities, our group, the Fenway Sports Management Group, will be in the middle of all of his sponsorship transactions, or Nike or McDonald's or those sorts of things. And we think that that's actually a fit with our companies because of his popularity in Asia in particular.
So you're really moving from being distinctly Boston initially to being truly of the world. Was this a deliberate strategy on the part of the ownership group to diversify, to become global, to perhaps even run the group? It almost feels like an investment portfolio, if you will.
Well, first of all, I would say Mr. Henry, Mr. Werner, Mr. Lucchino, the rest of our limited partners, they do have a lot of vision. In my career, I've worked for Ted Turner, and there's a lot of Ted Turner-like aspects to the ownership group right now. They have a lot of really creative, great ideas, very visionary ideas. And it's funny that you say that, because a lot of our limited partners are, investment portfolio managers. Mr. Henry obviously had a large hedge fund commodity trading business, which he still has. Mr. Werner has tremendous experience in the television and media businesses, which are also an important part of our company today. So I think maybe a lot of their backgrounds have led them to sort of think of it in that respect. I think there certainly was a plan to diversify and not be entirely reliant on New England and Boston, and that's what some of the investments we've made have been geared towards.
Now, you didn't mention Fenway Park. You are the owners of Fenway Park?
We are indeed. We are the owners of Fenway Park. Quite timely that we're having this interview here today. We celebrated the 100th anniversary of Fenway Park just last Friday. And if anyone has seen or was at the game, it was one of the most memorable events in the history of baseball, I would dare say. One of the rarest events in the history of baseball, since that had never happened before. And something that our ownership group takes a lot of pride in, because when they came in 10 years ago, they were the only bidders who were interested in having an open mind about whether Fenway Park could be saved. And ultimately, after some trial and effort, the decision was made, we can refurbish this. And there you go, you have an iconic 100-year-old park. So.
I think I can speak on behalf of all fans on how wonderful Fenway Park is. And, you succeeded in adding seats and adding different venues, including on the top of the Green Monster. And it is such a special place to go. And you talked about legacy earlier. It feels like the ownership really believes that Fenway Park is a really important part of that legacy for the next generations as well.
I think that's very well said. I think it may well be 100 years from now, it may be the greatest legacy that this ownership group has left, which is, the history of a park that was saved, some innovative things that we did in the seats, which were highly controversial at the time. Everyone now says, I love the Green Monster seats, but, at the time it was being done, this doesn't seem like something that should be done, and I think, we've done a lot of things that have proven, and we've invested a lot of money. Hundreds of millions of dollars of our ownership's money has been invested to save the park, and here we are today. And I think it's a great experience. When people talk about iconic ballparks, to me, there's no such thing as an iconic new ballpark. Iconic park is something where you remember where you stood with your father when he took you to a game, and that's part of. The vision of the refurbishment of the park was to make it feel like it's always been there.
Well, it's just delightful. And with the diversity of your portfolio, a diversified portfolio, how does the Fenway Sports Group administer the clubs, the organizations? Because I can imagine there's a lot of similarity, perhaps, in terms of overseeing a baseball operation and a soccer operation, but there must be differences as well, geographic and otherwise. How does the management decision process work? How do you ensure that content that makes the most sense for each of your enterprises?
Well, there's a lot to that, and I think, first of all, I'd start with we're learning all the time. I don't think we can say here's the blueprint to doing it, and we know how it all ought to work. For example, in the soccer business, there's been a lot for us to learn, and we're still learning a lot. But I think if you were to use the Red Sox as kind of our model, and I think it's a good model, you have a world-class CEO in Larry Lucchino, someone that anyone in the game of baseball would say is as good or better than any other executive in the game. And you let him do his thing, let him play his position. And he focuses on the Red Sox. That's his part of the portfolio, and 100% of his focus is going to be on making sure that the fan experience at Fenway Park, that the ball club on the field, that the expenditures on payroll, that those are all wise and prudent business decisions. So I think that is our model. And again, we're learning all the time, but we would like to apply that, or have applied that to each of our businesses. At NESN, our president at NESN, Sean McGrail, has been there for 20 plus years. Knows every person there is to know in the cable industry, knows every production that NESN has ever done, And that's kind of our example for how
Do
we
you
would
bring the leaders of each of the elements together occasionally to share what's going on and to share perspectives and best practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. I came from a company at Time Warner, which was notoriously siloed, and whether it was accurate or not, and certain parts of it were accurate. The Time Inc. guys making the magazines, the HBO guys making the HBO shows, the Warner Brothers people, they didn't really talk a lot or cross-pollinate a lot, but they were great at what they did. But we're smaller than a company like that, and we also have, if the Red Sox and NESN, don't cross-pollinate, that would be kind of not a very good management situation. So I think we do make sure that the people running the businesses that we are talking all the time, Mr. Henry, Mr. Werner, obviously sitting on top of all the businesses, and we do various things to make sure we all know what each other's doing. In the case of NESN and the Red Sox, it's relatively easy because NESN is at the ballpark, every day, and Mr. McGrail and Mr. Lucchino can get together and talk all the time. In the case of some of the other businesses, it's a little more complex, but we work at that, to keep the discussions working. We're bringing Liverpool to Fenway Park this summer.
Saw that in July.
In July 25th. This will be Liverpool's first tour of North America since 2004. So we're very excited about that. We're excited to get them to see a new fan base, and the actual game that we've chosen is against Roma. So in Boston, the Irish and the Italians in a big football game at Fenway Park, we think that'll have a lot of appeal. And they'll be training. Actually, Boston will be home base for Liverpool's training. They'll be training over at Harvard University, and we have 3 games on the tour, a game up in Toronto and also a game in Baltimore after the Fenway match. So it's not a simple thing to break across silos, and there's a lot to be said for making sure that the person running each individual business is doing a great job on their own. And I think synergies is a much overused word, but where there's easy things that you should be collaborating on, you should find a way to do that.
And you're doing it, which is wonderful. You mentioned earlier that Time Warner was a good, solid preparation, as was the rest of your career for going to Fenway Sports Group. You've been with the organization now almost 5 years. Are there any new muscles that you've had to acquire in terms of being now in, shall we call it, the sports entertainment industry more broadly?
Yeah, this has been 2.5 years. It'll be 3 years at the end of the summer. What I would say is, in my old job, I had exposure to a lot of different businesses, which were very different. And I think this is a little bit of a lawyer's lesson. My view is a lawyer doesn't do a very good job in-house for his client unless he really understands the business. So it's really important to get down and know, how does the DVD sales business work at Walmart or whatever the example would be. I think a lot of that I've tried to apply, here, and to understanding, I wasn't here for a lot of the years of this ownership group, but, Larry's been a tremendous teacher and mentor here at the Red Sox about how does everything happen about the game experience. Baseball's a complicated industry in and of itself because it's really 2 industries within one industry. It's the local business, which is the Red Sox business, but then Major League Baseball is the centralized part of the business. So you can think of it as 2 big pieces, and the centralized business are the national TV contracts, the national sponsorship opportunities, in the case of baseball, national merchandising, and that's a big business. The Red Sox would dearly love for the merchandising business to be on the local side of the business because, hats and T-shirt sales, rather than being centralized and being split 1/30th, when the Yankees and the Red Sox account for a disproportionate amount of the sales, we'd like to see it work otherwise. But that's centralized baseball, and that's a common denominator for all the teams. And then there's the local business, which is the fan experience at the park, the NESN experience, the televising it for viewers. So there's a lot to learn about that, and I think Larry and Sean, they've been really great to me about letting me sort of get into the nuts and bolts of the business. Maybe not the production truck, you don't really want me there, but it's been helpful because I think, again, to do a good job as a lawyer, frankly, as a finance person, you really need to understand the business at a very, very
Grassroots level.
very,
right?
very granular level, yes.
As you think about the various elements of Fenway Sports Group, would you care to just share with us maybe the percent allocation of your time, or where you put your energies in the rich array of businesses that you're over?
Yeah, that's a fair question, but it changes a lot depending on sort of what's going on at the time. So, as an example, when Major League Baseball was going through its collective bargaining negotiations for a new labor deal, myself and a team of other people were spending a lot of time on collective bargaining issues and how do the Red Sox feel about something. But I'd say right now it's fairly even. I think it's probably pretty even between the Red Sox, between NESN, and between, for me, Liverpool. I'm spending a decent amount of time on Liverpool, partly because we've been getting to know it and setting up some processes over there as the new owners. So it's relatively even. You know, my cable background from my prior career is probably the only part of my career that naturally lent itself to NESN and NESN's relationship with distributors, and so that's certainly been a big part of my time in the last year as well.
Parts of your enterprise are partly owned, not 100% owned. Very common in business to have 50%, 80%, almost like a joint venture structure. How does that impact how you work? I mean, certainly having to engage with partners and make sure the partners, the external colleagues, if you will, or your business partners are aligned and you're all aligned. Is that a challenge for the organization, or does it tend to work pretty effectively?
You know, I think it works pretty effectively. I mean, you know, I do think my Time Warner experience prepared me well for. We had a lot of limited partnership companies at Time Warner. Even our principal cable and movie business for a while had a partner in U.S. West for many years. So, you know, thinking about things from a partnership fairness perspective has just been something that I've lived with for a long time. And generally, if it's the right thing to do for the right reasons, it's going to be fine for your partner as well. So I think we do think about that, but I don't think it's been a significant structural impediment. I think we've got a great relationship with the Bruins. You know, obviously last year, for a Boston guy who's a hockey nut, last year was tremendous with them winning the cup. And hopefully by the time we watch this interview, they'll be proceeding along in the playoffs and back again. So
Absolutely. The NESN, one of the iconic regional sports networks in the entire country in the U.S., you recently announced a collaboration with WBZ here in Boston. I believe it's the first of its kind in the country. What was the rationale for doing this, and what do you think the benefit will be?
Well, I think you know, the rationale was basically they have some very good things in their weather telecasts that are very valuable to us because they fill in a need that we don't have. We don't really have that capability, and for them, you know, we fill a need that they have, which is on-site hits, you know, at the park and on the field. For both of us, it's promotion, you know, collaborative promotion, you know, in areas where we're really not stepping on each other. So it's complementary. I think it's a larger issue, which is that TV stations, newspapers, you know, everyone's looking to find easier ways to do cross-promotion less expensively. You know, and I think in the long run, you know, we do sports, news shows, you know, obviously every single day. And I don't know exactly where the business is going to go, but they do 10-minute segments, and we're specializing in that all day. So, you know, we're already doing it, so if we could do it for them, you know, that could be a model that could emerge, you know, over time.
It'll be fun to watch and see it evolve. The digital world is upon us. How we watch things, how we view things, the idea of using you know, replay, and TV networks are now losing viewers to be able to watch on demand. Is that impacting your business? Do you see it impacting the business moving forward, how you might conduct business?
Well, I think NESN is really fortunate to be in the live sports business. The live sports business may be the last bastion that has some immunity to DVR watching. I know when I watch a game on DVR and a team is far ahead and I'm feeling pretty comfortable, but then they starts to be a comeback, I can't wait, and I flick back to live because I have to know what the
What's going
score
on
is.
here? Sure.
And I don't think I'm unusual in that regard. You can be a patient DVR watcher, but when someone accidentally slips you the score because they didn't know you were waiting to watch it on DVR. So Nesson is has great live content, and that is very valuable today. As you've seen, there's been some amazing rights fee deals in college and in baseball and frankly in all the sports because of the uniqueness of the content. But you think you always sort of have figured that out and that it's immune proof to DVRs. What we've actually seen is that our biggest form of competition now are people's DVRs, not from their ability to DVR the game itself, but because what's the most popular content for most people, what they've chosen to already program and save on their DVR. So it could be Wednesday night and a game gets to a point where it's not competitive and people go to the content, the HBO show that they've been waiting all week to watch. So that's been a surprise. It's definitely a trend that we're seeing, which is you're competing against the viewers of most highest interest.
Competition is everywhere, isn't it? What's next? What's next for Fenway Sports Group?
Well, that's a great question. The Liverpool acquisition is a very big transaction for us, and I think it's probably something we need to spend some time, digesting, if you will. Although we did do the LeBron James transaction, but that's a really very different kind of a transaction. So I think we want to get the things that we have right now back to winning. I think if you were to have one message to take away about what we're about is we believe the most important part of our business is winning on the field or on the track or on the pitch in the case of football. That's the beginning of the success with the fans. It's the beginning of the success financially, but that has to be sort of the first commitment. And with the Red Sox, we missed the playoffs 2 years in a row, which is very unusual over the last 10 years. And so something, notwithstanding a slow start, we really would like to turn that around. And in the case of our racing team, we actually have had some pretty good success, but we'd really like to win the championship. And in the case of our football team, there are a variety of different ways to measure success, but we'd like to bring that to the fans because it's Liverpool's an iconic football team with some of the most passionate, devoted fans in the world, but hasn't had the best run of luck of late.
A true international reputation. A final question, Ed. Thank you first and foremost for engaging with us today. Our students, a number of our students are contemplating careers in sports entertainment, in the sports entertainment industry, and I'm sure there are many viewers contemplating how can I possibly get into the Fenway Sports Group world, but let's maybe take it a little more broadly, sports entertainment in general. What advice would you have for our students as they strive to prepare potentially for a career in sports entertainment?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I have a clear path to follow, but I think I'm an example that I wouldn't have known 2.5 years ago that I was going to end up in sports. There are some businesses that are naturally ancillary to sports and from which entree is becoming increasingly more frequent. I think all sports businesses now have or are becoming much more professionally run, much more oriented towards business management principles, for example, much more aware of the fact that they are mini media companies, and so the old mom and pop kind of family operations are becoming very few and far between. I would suggest to people that are interested in it, and it isn't necessarily just an easy entree into the sports business, but I think the most important thing that young executives can pursue is mentors. To me, the best thing you can have is someone that you can bounce something off at any time in your career and have someone give you candid, helpful feedback from the perspective of what they think is best from you, not from the perspective of what they think is best for them. And so I can tell you, I've been very fortunate to have some of the greatest mentors along the way of my legal career. And you have to work at it, though. You just, you can't expect, you gotta be proactive, you gotta write notes, you gotta stick with it. But those things will pay off for an entire career, and whether it's in sports or media or whether it's in some other industry, people that know you, that you trust for advice about where you're going in career, I would think that's the best thing you can have.
And Ed, I can't think of anybody who'd be a better mentor than you based on this conversation.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
We've just completed a wonderful interview with Ed Weiss, General Counsel for the Fenway Sports Group. We've covered a lot of ground here, literally, on the soccer field, on the baseball field, on the racetrack. We wish Fenway Sports Group all the best. We know that Fenway Sports Group is in great hands at the General Counsel level with Ed Weiss. Thank you.